Hello everyone, welcome to the bar. Please take a seat. Staff will be with you shortly to take your orders and enjoy your evening's entertainment. Today, we continue with our literature night at the bar, reading Star Wars Darth Bane Path of Destruction. Previously, I stopped at Chapter 5, Part 1. So today, let's continue and move on to Chapter 6, Part 1. Also, if the stream is a little bit soft or there is a voice variation that you guys are not comfortable with, please do let me know. Alright? Star Wars Darth Bane Path of Destruction, a novel of the Old Republic. Written by Drew Karpyshyn. Part 1, Chapter 6. Fasira's yellow sun was directly overhead, beaming down across the lush valley and over the jungle camp where Des and his fellow Sith troopers waited. Beneath the shelter of a Sidera tree, Des ran a quick system check on his TC-22 blaster rifle to pass the time. The power pack was fully charged, good for 50 shots. His backup power pack checked out too. The aim was off just slightly, a common problem with all TC models. They had good range and power, but over time their scopes could lose precise calibration. A quick adjustment brought it back into line. His hands moved with a quick confidence born of 1,000 repetitions. Over the past 12 months, he'd gone through the routine so many times, he barely even had to think about it anymore. A pre-battle weapons check wasn't standard practice in the Sith militia, but it was a habit he'd gotten into, one that had saved his life. One that has saved his life, on several occasions. The Sith army was growing so fast that supplies couldn't keep up with the demand. The best equipment was reserved for veteran soldiers and officers, of course. While new recruits were forced to make do with whatever they had available. This is something that I really am confused even about army. These are the people that are gonna fight on the front lines, right? At least equip them with something better or standardized instead of like, oh, you guys make do with whatever you have. I don't know. Now that he was a sergeant, he could have requested a better model, but the TC-22 was the first weapon he'd learned to fire, and he'd become pretty good with it as time has passed. Des figured a little routine maintenance was a better option than learning to master the subtle nuances of a whole nother weapon. His blaster pistol, that he keeps holstered, however, was top of the line. Not all Sith troopers were given pistols. For most soldiers, a medium-range, semi-repeating rifle was weapon enough. They'd probably be dead long before they ever got close enough to their enemy to use a pistol. However, in the past year, Des has proven 12 times over that he was more than just turret fodder. Soldiers good enough to survive the initial rush and get in tight to the enemy ranks needed a weapon more suited to close quarters combat. For this, that weapon was the GSI-22D, the finest disruptor pistol manufactured by Galactic Solutions Industries. Optimum range was only 20 meters. However, within that distance, it was capable of disintegrating armor, flesh, and joint plating with equal efficiency. The 21D was illegal in most Republic-controlled sectors of the galaxy, a testament to its amazing destructive potential. The Disruptor's power pack carried only enough charge for 12 shots, but when he was eye to eye with an opponent, it rarely took more than one. He slid the pistol into the holster clip to his belt, checked the vibroblade in his boot, and turned his attention to his troops. All around him, the men and women of his unit were following his lead, making similar inspections of their own equipment as they waited for his orders. He couldn't help but smile. He trained them well. He joined the Sith armies as a way to escape both prison and Apatros itself. But it hadn't taken him long to actually grow fond of being a soldier. There was a weird form of camaraderie among the men and women of this unit. While at his side, even, a bond that quickly extended to include Des himself. He never felt any connection to the miners on Apatros, and indeed had always considered himself something of a loner. But in the military, he'd found his true place. He belonged here with the troops. His troops. Senior Trooper Adanar noticed his gaze and responded by thumping a closed fist lightly against his chest twice, just over his heart. It was a gesture known only to the members of this unit, a private sign of loyalty and fidelity, a symbol of the bond they all shared. Des returned the gesture. He and Adanar had been in the same unit since day one of their military careers. The recruiter had signed them up together and assigned them both to the Gloomwalkers, Lieutenant Ulabor's unit. Adanar picked up his rifle and sauntered over to where his friend was sitting. You figure we're going to need that disruptor pistol of yours anytime soon. Sarge? No harm in being prepared, Des replied, whipping out the disruptor and giving it a spinning flourish before returning it to its holster. I wish they gave us the go-ahead already, Adanar grumbled. We've been in this position for 2 days now. How long are they going to make us wait? Des shrugged. We can't go until they're ready to move in with the main force. We go too early, and the plan falls apart. The Gloomwalkers had earned quite a reputation over the past year. They'd been in scores of battles on half a dozen worlds, and they tasted far more than their fair share of victories. They'd gone from being one of 1,000 expendable frontline units to elite troops reserved for only the critical missions. Right now, they were the key to capturing the manufacturing world of Fasira, if someone would just give them the order to go. Until then, they were stuck in this jungle camp, an hour's march away from their objective. They'd been here only for 2 days, but it was already beginning to take its toll. Adanar began to pace. Des sat calmly in the shade, watching him march back and forth. Don't wear yourself out, Adanar, he said after a minute. We're not going anywhere until nightfall at the earliest. We might as well get comfortable here. Adanar stopped pacing, but he didn't sit down. The lieutenant says this is going to be as easy as a spice run, he said, trying to keep his voice casual. You figure he's right? Lieutenant Ulabor had received many accolades from the success of his troops, but everyone in the unit knew who was really in charge when the blaster bolts started flying. The fact had become painfully clear nearly a year before, back on Kashyyyk, where Des and Adanar had seen their first action. The Brotherhood of Darkness had tried to secure a foothold in the Mid-Rim by invading the Kashyyyk system, sending in waves after waves of troops to capture the resource-rich homeworld of the Wookiees. But the planet was a Republic stronghold, and they weren't about to retreat, no matter how badly they were outnumbered. When the Sith fleet first landed, their enemies simply vanished into the forest. The invasion turned into a war of attrition, a long, drawn-out campaign fought among the branches of the Roshir trees high above the planet's surface. The Sith troops weren't used to fighting in treetops, and the thick foliage and Kashyyyk vines of the forest canopy provided perfect cover for Republic soldiers and their Wookiee guides to launch ambushes and guerrilla raids. Thousands upon thousands of the invading Sith forces were wiped out, most dying without even seeing the opponent who had fired the fatal shot on them. But the Sith masters just kept sending in more troops, like lambs into the slaughter. The Gloomwalkers were part of the second wave of reinforcements. During their first battle, they were separated from the main lines, cut off from the rest of the army. Alone and surrounded by enemies, Lieutenant Ulabor panicked. Without direct orders, he had no idea what to do to keep his unit alive. Fortunately, Des was there to step in and save their hides. For starters, he could sense the enemy even when he couldn't see them. Somehow, he just knew they were there. He couldn't explain it, but he stopped trying to explain his unique talents long ago. Now, he just tried to use them to his best advantage. With Des as their guide, the Gloomwalkers were able to avoid the traps and ambushes as they slowly worked their way back to rejoin the main force. It took 3 days and nights, countless brief but deadly battles, and a seemingly endless march through enemy territory. but they made it. Through all the fighting, the unit lost only a handful of soldiers, and the troops who made it back knew that they all owed their lives to Dessel. The story of the Gloomwalkers became a rallying point for the rest of the Sith army, raising morale that had become dangerously low. If a single unit could survive for 3 days on its own, they reasoned, then surely 1,000 units could win the war. In the end, it took almost 2,000 units, but Kashyyyk finally fell to the Sith army. As leader of the heroic Gloomwalkers, Lieutenant Ulabor was given a special commendation. He never once bothered to mention that Des was really the one responsible. Still, he'd been smart enough to promote Des to sergeant, and he knew enough to stay out of the way when things got hot. So, Adana repeated, "What's the word, Des? When they finally giving us the go, is this mission going to be a spice run?" The lieutenant's just saying what he thinks we all want to hear. "I know that, Des. That's why I'm talking to you. I want to know what we're really in for." Des thought about it for a few moments. They were holed up in the jungle on the edge of a narrow valley, the only route into Fasira's capital city, where the Republic army had set up its base camp. On a nearby hill overlooking the valley was a Republic outpost. The Sith tried to move troops through the valley. Even at night, the outpost was sure to spot them. They'd signal ahead to the base camp so their defenses would be up and fully operational long before the Sith army ever reached them. The Gloomwalkers' missions were simple. Eliminate the outpost so that the rest of the army could launch a surprise attack on the Republic base camp. They had interference boxes, short-range jamming equipment they could use to keep the outpost from transmitting a signal to warn the main camp. But they'd have to hit them fast and hit them hard. The outpost reported each day at dawn, and if the Gloomwalkers struck too soon, the Republic would realize something was wrong when the daily report didn't come in. Timing was critical. They'd have to take them out just before the main force entered the area. That would leave a few hours to cross the valley and catch the base camp unprepared. It was doable, but only if everything was coordinated perfectly. The Gloomwalkers were in place, but the main force wasn't ready to make its move yet, and so they waited. "Hey Revantu, how's it going?" "I'm worried," Des finally conceded. "Hitting the outpost won't be easy. Once we get the go-ahead, there's no margin for error. We have to be absolutely perfect. If they've got any surprises waiting for us, we'll be in trouble." "How's your day?" "I'm just doing a little literature night for the bar, both to improve my own English and to read through a book." "Aw, thanks. Thank you so much." The Darth Bane trilogy is literally one of my favorite Star Wars trilogy expanded universe books that I like to read. So just felt like sharing it with the rest of the world, you know? And doing my own dramatic voiceover of the characters. Adanar spit on the ground. "I knew it! You've got a bad feeling, don't you? This is Hushkor all over again." Hushkor had been a disaster. After Kashyyyk fell, the surviving Republic soldiers fled to the neighboring world of Trandosha. 20 units of Sith troopers, including the Gloomwalkers, were sent in pursuit. They caught up to the Republic survivors on the desert plains outside the city of Hushkor. A day of savage fighting left many dead on both sides. But no definitive victor. What do you mean? Oh, this. Yeah. This is I'm what you call a Vtuber. YouTubers that use a virtual avatar to speak, to stream ourselves instead of our actual selves. this bar is kind of like, well, where my character works, really. I'm a bartender. So, nah, you can check out a lot. There's a lot of us, really. I'm just a rare occasion where I actually do stuff like this. Most VTubers usually stream video games, so don't worry too much about it. You can check them out as well. It's quite a bit if you look all over YouTube or Twitch. Now where was I? Yeah. A day of savage fighting left many dead on both sides, but no definitive victor. Des had been uneasy throughout the whole battle, though at the time he hadn't been able to say why. His unease had grown as night fell, and both sides retreated to opposite ends of the battlefield to regroup. The Trandoshans had struck a few hours later. Pitch black night wasn't a problem for the reptilian Trandoshans. They could see into their infrared spectrum. They seemed to come out of nowhere, materializing from the darkness like a nightmare-given substance. Unlike the Wookiees, the Trandoshans weren't allied with either side in the galactic civil war. Bounty hunters and mercenaries of Hishkor cut a swath of destruction through the ranks of both Republic and Sith soldiers alike, not caring whom they fought just as long as they came away with trophies from their kill. Details of the massacre was never officially released. Des had been at the very center of the carnage, and even he could barely piece together what had happened. The attack caught the Gloomwalkers off guard. Well, I mean, really, to be honest, there's nothing wrong with that, really. Some people enjoyed it, doing crossplay or doing, well, boy as female avatars, or even some females playing male avatars. And it's one of the coolest things about this community in general, that really you could be whatever you want. Where was I? Oh yeah. The attack caught the Gloomwalkers, like every other unit, completely off guard. By the time the sun rose, nearly half the Sith troops had been cut down. Des lost a lot of friends in the slaughter. Friends he might have been able to save if he had paid more attention to the dark premonition he'd felt when he first set foot on that forsaken desert world. And he vowed he'd never let the Gloomwalkers get caught in a slaughter like that again. In the end, Hishkor paid a heavy price for the ambush. Reinforcements were sent in from Kashyyyk to overwhelm both the Republic forces and the Trandoshans. It took less than a week for the Sith to claim victory. Nah, it's good, really. I enjoy interacting. Of course, yeah, I would like to continue the story. If you have any questions or burning questions, do feel free to talk or ask. It took less than a week for the Sith to claim victory, and the once proud city was sacked and razed to the ground. Many of the Trandoshans simply gave up the fight to defend their homes and offered their services to the conquerors. They were bounty hunters and mercenaries by trade, and hunters by nature. They didn't care whom they were working for, as long as there was a chance to do some more killing. Needless to say, the Sith had welcomed them with open arms. This isn't going to be a repeat of Hishkor, Des assured his nervous companion. It was true he had an uneasy feeling once again, but this time it was different. Something big was going to happen. Des couldn't say for sure whether it would be good or bad. Come on, Des, Donner pressed. Go talk to Ulabor. He listens to you sometimes. And tell him what? Donner threw his hands up in exasperation. I don't know. Tell him about your bad feeling. Make him get on the comms to HQ and tell them to pull us back. or convince them to send us in. Just don't leave us sitting out here like a bunch of dead womp rats rotting in the sun. Before Des could answer, one of the junior troopers, a young woman named Lucia, ran up and snapped off a crisp salute. Sergeant, Lieutenant Ullabor wants you to assemble the troops by his tent. He'll address them in 30 minutes, she said, her voice earnest and excited. Yeah, I really do enjoy reading. It was something that I did for my younger brother when we were young. I loved to tell bedtime stories to him, where I would read all these sorts of fantasy worlds and stuff in my head, and I would just go wild. One of the reasons why I love being a dungeon master for D&D as well. Des flashed a smile at his friend. I think we finally got our orders. The soldiers stood at attention as the lieutenant and Des reviewed the troops. As it always did, the inspection consisted of Ullabor moving up and down the ranks, nodding and giving half-muttered approvals. It was mostly for show, a chance for Ullabor to feel as if he had something to do with the success of a mission. Once they were done, the lieutenant marched to the front of the column and turned to face the troops. Des stood alone in front of the unit, his back to them, so he could be face to face with his superior officer. Everyone here is familiar with our mission objective? Ullabor began, his voice unusually high-pitched and loud. Des guessed he was trying to sound authoritative, but it came across as shrill. Do I stream gameplay? Yeah, I do. I do some streaming for Cyberpunk, and hopefully some other strategy games. I play a lot of strategy games. Stellaris comes to mind, and Crusader Kings as well. But I'll save those for in future, not right now, really. Thanks for asking. Now, alright. I'll leave the specifics of the mission to the sergeant here, he continued. Our task is not an easy one, but the days of the Gloomwalkers getting easy jobs are long gone. I don't have much else to say. I know you're all eager as I am to end this pointless waiting. That's why I'm here to inform you that we've been given the orders to move out. We hit the Republic outpost in 1 hour. Horrified gasps and loud whispers of disbelief rose up from the ranks. Ullabor stepped back as if he'd been slapped. He had obviously been expecting cheers and exultation, and was rattled by the sudden anger and lack of discipline. Gloomwalkers, hold! Des barked. He stood up to the lieutenant and lowered his voice. Sir, are you certain those were the orders? Move in 1 hour? Are you certain they didn't mean 1 hour after nightfall? As if feeling anger all of a sudden, Ullabor snapped, making no attempt to keep his own voice down. Are you questioning me, Sergeant? No, sir. It's just that if we leave in 1 hour, it'll still be light out. They'll see us coming. By the time they see us, we'll already be close enough to jam their transmitters, the lieutenant countered. They won't be able to signal back to the base camp. It's not that, sir. It's the gunships. They've got 3 repulsor craft equipped with heavy repeating flash cannons. If we try to take the outpost during the day, those things will mow us down from the sky. Yeah, after this. After this. Hold on. Thanks for taking interest, really. Right. It's a suicide mission! Someone shouted out from the ranks. Ullabor's eyes became narrow slits, and his face turned red. The main army is moving out at dusk, Sergeant, he said through tightly clenched teeth. They want us to cross the valley in darkness and hit the Republic base camp at first light. Then there's no reason for us to move so soon, Des replied, struggling to remain calm. If they start at dusk, It's going to take at least 3 hours before they reach the valley from their current position. That gives us plenty of time to take the outpost down before they get here. Even if we wait until after dark. It's obvious you don't understand what's really going on, Sergeant. Ullabor spoke as if arguing with his stubborn child. The main force isn't going to start moving until after we report our mission is complete. That's why we have to move now. It made sense. The generals wouldn't want to risk the main force until they knew for certain the valley was secure. But sending them in during the light of day guaranteed that the Gloomwalkers' casualty rate would increase fivefold. You have to calm back the HQ, sir, and explain the situation to them. I said, we can't take those gunships on in the air. We have to wait till they ground them for night. You have to make them understand what we're up against. The lieutenant acted as if he hadn't even heard him. The generals give the orders to me, and I give them to you, he snapped. Not the other way around, Sergeant. The army is moving out at dusk, and that's not going to change to fit your schedule. They won't have to change their plans, Des insisted. If we leave as soon as it gets dark, we'll still have the outpost down by the time they reach the valley, but sending us in now is just enough! The lieutenant snapped. Quit braying like a bantha cut off from its herd. You have your orders now, follow them! Or do you want to see what happens to soldiers who defy their superior officers? Suddenly it was clear to Des what was really going on. Ullabor knew the orders was a mistake, but he was too scared to do anything about it. The order must have come directly from one of the Dark Lords. Ullabor would rather lead his troops into a slaughter than face the wrath of one of their Sith masters. But Des wasn't about to let him drive the Gloomwalkers to their doom. This wasn't going to become a repeat of Hushkor. He hesitated for only a second before slamming his fist into his lieutenant's chin, knocking him cold. There was stunned silence from the rest of the troops as Ullabor slumped to the ground. Des quickly took away the fallen officer's weapons, then turned and pointed at a pair of the newest recruits. You two, keep an eye on the lieutenant. Make sure he's comfortable if he wakes up, but don't let him anywhere near the comms. To the communications officer, he said, just before dusk, send a message back to HQ telling them our mission is complete so they can start moving the main force into the valley. That will give us 2 hours to achieve our objective before they get here. Turning to address the rest of the troops, he paused to let the gravity of his next words sink in. What I've done here is mutiny, he said slowly. Every time I read through this kind of thing, I tend to not go according to how the script actually described the character talking like. This makes me remember about the Harry Potter movies, where I believe it was in the Goblet of Fire, where in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, they mentioned that Dumbledore spoke calmly to Harry, and I was like, Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire? And in the movies, Michael Gambon was like, Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire? I mean, there is definitely going to be a disparity between how the novel here says the character spoke in a certain way and how I describe it, because I wanted to make it sound a bit more descriptive. There's a chance anyone who follows me from here on in will face a court-martial when this is over. If any of you feel that you can't follow my orders after what I've done here today, speak up now and I'll surrender command to Senior Trooper Adunar for the rest of the mission. He gazed out across all his soldiers. For a second, nobody spoke. Give me a moment. Alright, where was I? Sorry about that. Let's continue. He gazed out across the soldiers. For a second, nobody spoke. Then, as one, they all raised their fists and gave 2 light raps on their chests just above the heart. Overwhelmed with pride, Des had to swallow hard before he could give his final orders to the troops. His troops. Gloomwalkers dismissed. The ranks dispersed into groups of 2s and 3s, the soldiers whispering quietly to one another. Adonar broke away from the rest and came up to Des. Lunabor's not going to forget this, he said quietly. What are you going to do about him? Hey, enjoy your food. Don't worry. I mean, this could technically be used as a sort of just background noise. This whole stream. After we take the outpost, they'll want to pin a medal on our commanding officer, Des replied. I'm betting he'd rather shut up and accept it than let anyone else know what really happened. Dunner grunted. Guess you got it all worked out then. Not quite, Des admitted. Still not sure how we're going to take down that outpost. Chapter 7. The outpost was located in a clearing on the top of a plateau overlooking the valley. Under the cover of night, the Gloomwalkers had moved silently through the jungle until they had it surrounded. Des had broken the unit up into 4 squads, each approaching from a different side. Each squad carried an interference box with them. They had to set up and activate the eye boxes once they were close enough to within half a kilometer of the base, jamming all transmissions within their perimeter. The squads had continued on to the edges of the clearing, then stopped, waiting for Des to give them the signal to move in. With no communication among the squads, the eye boxes jammed their own equipment as well. The most reliable signal was the sound of blaster fire. As he stared across the clearing at the 3 repulsor craft sitting on the landing pad atop the outpost's roof, Des felt a familiar feeling in the pit of his stomach. All soldiers felt the same thing going into battle, whether they admitted it or not. Fear. Fear of failure, fear of dying, fear of watching their friends die, fear of being wounded and living out the rest of their days crippled or maimed. Fear was always there, and it would devour you if you let it. Des knew how to turn that fear to his own advantage. Take what makes you weak and turn it into something that makes you strong. Transform your fear into anger and hate, hatred of the enemy, hatred of the Republic and the Jedi. And that hate gave him strength, and strength gave him victory. Now for anyone who's going to be watching this, the VOD, the strength through victory thing and hate gives strength is actually part of the Sith code, whether or not Des realizes it or not, which is a really nice subtle reference, I guess, for the novel writer, for the author, to put into the book, as Des was subtly already aligning himself with the Sith code and the ideology of the Sith order. For Des, the transformation came easily once the fighting started. Thanks to his abusive father, he had been turning fear into anger and hate ever since he was a child. Maybe that was why he was such a good soldier. Maybe that's why the others looked to him for leadership. They were waiting on his signal even now, waiting for him to take the first shot. As soon as he did, they charged the outpost. The Gloomwalkers were outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. They'd need the advantage of surprise to even out the odds. But those gunships were a problem Des hadn't anticipated. The clearing was surrounded by bright lights that illuminated everything within 100 meters of the outpost itself. Even though the repulsor craft were grounded, there was a soldier stationed in the open flatbed at the rear of each vehicle operating the turrets. The armored walls The armored walls of the flatbed rose to waist height to give the gunner some cover, and the turret itself was heavily shielded to protect it from enemy fire. From the landing pad on the roof, the gunners had a clear view of the surrounding area. If he fired that first shot, the other units would charge out into the clearing and right into the storm of heavy repeating blaster fire. They'd be torn apart, like Zuka tossed into a Rancor pit. "What's the matter, Sarge?" one of the soldiers in his squad asked. It was Lucia, the junior trooper who delivered Ulibor's orders to him earlier. "What are we waiting for?" It was too late to call off the mission now. The main army was already on the move. By the time Des get back to camp to warn them, they'd already be halfway through the valley. He glanced down at the young recruit and noticed the scope on her weapon. Lucia was carrying a TC-17 long-range blaster rifle. Her knuckles were white from gripping her weapon too tightly in fear and anticipation. She'd seen only minor combat duty before being assigned to the Gloomwalkers, but Des knew she was one of the best shots in the unit. The TC-17 was only good for a dozen shots before the power cell had to be switched out, but it had a range well over 300 meters. That's actually pretty far considering it's a blaster rifle. Each of the 4 squads had a sniper assigned to it. When the fighting began, their job was to watch the perimeter of the battle and make sure none of the Republic soldiers escape to warn their main camp. "See those soldiers standing in the rear of the gunships? The ones working the flash cannons?" he asked her. She nodded. "If we don't get rid of them somehow, they're going to turn our squads into turret fodder about 10 seconds into the battle." She nodded again, her eyes wide and scared. Des tried to keep his voice even and professional to calm her down. "I want you to think about this very carefully now, Trooper. How fast do you think you could take them out from here?" At hearing that, she hesitated. I don't even know if I could, Sarge. Not all of them. Not from this angle. I could get a line on the first one, but as soon as he goes down, I doubt the others would stand still long enough for me to take aim. They'll probably duck down in the flatbed for cover, and even if I take the gunners out, there's half a dozen more soldiers on that roof who would jump in to take their places. I can't drop 9 targets that fast by myself, Sarge. Nobody can. Des bit his lip and tried to figure out an answer to the problem. There were only 3 gunships. He could somehow get a message to the sniper in each squad and have them fire exactly at the same time. They might be able to take out the unsuspecting gunners, though they still have to stop the other 6 soldiers from replacing them. He cut off his own line of thought with a silent curse. This is not gonna work. Because of the eye boxes, there was no way to get a message to the other squads in time. Taking the sniper rifle from Lucia's hands, he brought the weapon up and set his eye to the scope to get a better look of the situation. He scanned the roof quickly from side to side, noting the position of every Republic soldier. With the magnification of the scope, he could make out their features clear enough to see their lips moving as they spoke. The situation was practically hopeless. The outpost was the key to taking Fasira, and the turrets on the roof were the key to taking the outpost. But Des was out of options, and almost out of time. He felt the fear stronger than ever and took a deep breath to focus his mind. Adrenaline began to pump through his veins as he redirected the fear to give him strength and power. He lined the blaster scope up on one of the gunners, and the red veil fell across his vision. And then, he fired. Acting on instinct, moving too quickly to let his conscious thought get in the way, he didn't even see the first soldier drop. The scope was already moving to its next target. The second gunner had just enough time to open his eyes wide in surprise before Des fired and moved on to the third, but she'd seen the first gunner go down and had already dropped down behind the armored walls of the gunship's flatbed for cover. Des resisted the impulse to fire wildly and moved the scope in a tight circle, looking in vain for a clear shot. The sound of blaster fire exploded in the night, along with the shouts and pounding feet as the Gloomwalkers burst from their cover and rushed the outpost. They'd followed their orders to the letter, charging out at the sound of the first shot. Des knew he had only a few seconds before the turrets opened up on them and turned the clearing into a killing field. But he couldn't see the shot to take out the dirt gunner. He whipped the rifle around in desperation, looking for a new target on the roof. He set his sight on the soldier, crouched down low beside a small canister. The soldier wasn't moving, and he'd covered his face with his hands as if shielding his vision. The blast from Des's weapon hit him square in the chest just as the device of the soldier's feet detonated. "Flash canister!" Lucia screamed, but her warning came too late. The view through the scope vanished in a blinding white flare, temporarily blinding Des. But with his vision gone, he could suddenly see everything clearly. He knew the position of every soldier even as they all scrambled for cover. He could track exactly where they were and where they were going. The soldier in the third turret was training the cannons on the incoming wave of troopers. In the excitement, she popped her head up just slightly above the walls of the flatbed, leaving the smallest of targets exposed. Des took her with a single shot, the bolt going in cleanly through one ear hole on her helmet and out the other. It was as if time had slowed down. Moving with a calm and deadly precision, he trained his rifle on the next target, taking her through the heart. Barely a moment later, he got the soldier beside her right between his cold blue eyes. Des took one man in the back as he ran from the nearest gunship. Another was halfway up one of the flatbed's ladders when a bolt sliced through his thigh, knocking him off balance. He fell from the ladder, and Des put another shot through his chest before he hit the ground. It had taken less than 3 seconds to wipe out 8 of the 9 soldiers. The last one made a run for the edge, hoping to escape by diving off the roof on the far side of the building. Des let him run. He could feel the terror coming in waves off of his doomed prey. He savored it for as long as he could. The soldier leapt from the rooftop and seemed to hang in midair for 1 second. Des fired his last 3 shots into the soldier's body, draining the weapon's power cell. He handed the weapon back to Lucia, blinking rapidly as the tears welling up around his eyes tried to soothe the damage to the damaged retinas. The effects of the flash canister were only temporary. His vision was already beginning to return, and the miraculous second sight he experienced was slipping away. Rubbing his eyes, he knew now was not the time to think about what had just happened. He'd eliminated the gunners, but his troops were still outnumbered. They needed him down in the hot zone, not here on the edges of the battle. "Keep an eye on that roof," he ordered Lucia. "If any of those Republic mudcrutchers appear on top, take them out before they get to the gunships." She didn't reply. Her mouth was hanging open in amazement at what she'd just witnessed. Des grabbed her by the shoulder and gave her a rough shake. Snap out of it, trooper! You've got a job to do!" She shook her head to gather her senses and nodded, then loaded another energy cell into her weapon. Satisfied, Des pulled out the 21D and charged across the clearing, eager to join in the battle. 3 hours later, it was all over. The mission had been a complete success. The outpost was theirs, and the Republic had no idea that thousands of Sith troopers were marching through the valley to attack them at first light. The battle itself had been short but bloody. 46 Republic soldiers dead, and 9 of Des' own. Every time a Gloomwalker went down, part of Des felt he'd failed somehow. But given the nature of their mission, keeping the casualties under double digits was more than he could have had reasonably hoped for. Once their objective was secured, he'd left Adana and a small contingent to hold the outpost. With Des in lead, the rest of the unit marched back to its base camp. Along the way, he tried to ignore the hushed whispers and furtive looks the rest of the company was giving him. Lucia had spread the word of his amazing shooting, and it was the talk of the unit. None of them was brave enough to say anything to his face, but he could hear snippets of conversations from the ranks behind him. Honestly, he couldn't even blame them. Looking back, even he wasn't sure what had happened. Des knew he was a good marksman, but he was no sniper. Yet somehow, he'd managed to pull off a dozen impossible shots with a weapon he'd never fired before. Most of them after being blinded by a flash canister even. It was beyond unbelievable. It was as if, when he'd lost his vision, some mysterious power had taken over and guided his actions. It was exhilarating, but at the same time it was terrifying. Des thought to himself, where has this power come from? Why couldn't I control it? He was so wrapped up in his thoughts that at first he didn't even notice the strangers waiting at the base camp. It was only after they stepped up and slapped the stun cuffs on his wrists that Des realized what was going on. Welcome back, Sergeant. Ulibor's voice was filled with bile. Des glanced around. A dozen enforcers, the military security of the Sith army, were standing with weapons drawn. Ulibor stood behind them, a deep bruise on his face where Des had struck him. In the background, Des could see the 2 junior recruits he'd left in charge of Ulibor. They were staring down at the ground, embarrassed and ashamed. Did you really think that those raw recruits would keep your commanding officer trussed up like some kind of prisoner? Ulibor taunted him from behind the protective walls of armed guards. Did you really believe they would follow you in your madness? That madness saved our lives, Lucia shouted. Des held up his shackled hands to silence her. This situation can easily get out of hand, far too easily. I shouldn't have said easily twice. I'm paraphrasing some of the lines, of course. When nothing else happened, the lieutenant seemed to gain some courage. He stepped out from behind the protective wall of enforcers and over to Des. I warned you about disobeying orders, he sneered. Now you get to see firsthand how the Brotherhood of Darkness deals with mutinous soldiers. A few of the Gloomwalkers began to reach slowly for their weapons, but Des shook his head, and they froze. The enforcers already had their blasters drawn and weren't afraid to use them. His unit wouldn't manage to get off even a single shot. What's the matter, Sergeant? Ulibor pressed, drawing closer to his defeated enemy. Too close. Nothing to say? Des knew he could kill the lieutenant with one quick move. The enforcers would take him out, but at least Ulibor would go with him. Every fiber of his being wanted to lash out and end both their lives in a great bath of blood and blaster fire. But he managed to fight the impulse. There was no point in throwing his life away. A court-martial would likely end in a death sentence, but at least, if he went to trial, he'd have a chance. Ulibor stepped up and slapped him across the face once, then spat on his boots and stepped back. Take him away, he said to the enforcers, turning his back on Des. As Des was being taken away, he couldn't help but see the look in the eyes of Lucia and the troopers whose lives he'd saved just hours ago. He had a feeling the next time the unit went into combat, Ulibor would suffer an unfortunate and fatal accident. That realization brought the hint of a smile to his lips. The enforcers marched him through the jungle for hours, weapons drawn and trained on him the entire time. They only lowered them when they reached the sentries on the perimeter of the main Sith camp. Prisoners for a court-martial, one of the enforcers said flatly. Go tell Lord Kopex. The sentry saluted and ran off. They marched Des through the camp towards the brig. He saw recognition in the eyes of many soldiers. With his height and bald head, he was an imposing figure, and many troopers heard about his exploits. Seeing a formerly ideal soldier being brought before a court-martial was sure to leave an impression. They reached the camp's makeshift prison, a small containment field over a 3x3 by 3 meter pit that served as a holding area for captured spies and prisoners of war. The enforcers had relieved him of his weapons when they first took him into custody. Now, they did a more thorough search and stripped him of all other personal effects. Then, they shut down the containment field and roughly tossed him in, not even bothering to release his cuffs. He landed awkwardly on the hard ground at the bottom of the hole. As he struggled to his feet, he heard an unmistakable hum as the field was activated once again, sealing him in. Welcome back. How was your food? The pit was empty, Other than Des himself, the Sith didn't tend to keep prisoners around for long. He began to wonder if he'd made a serious mistake. He'd hoped his past service might buy him some leniency in his trial, but now he realized his reputation might actually work against him. The Sith Masters weren't known for their tolerance or their mercy. He had defied a direct order. There was a good chance they'd decide to make a harsh example out of him. He couldn't say how long they'd left him at the bottom of that pit. After a while, he fell asleep, exhausted by the battle and the forced march. He slipped in and out of consciousness. At one point, it was light outside his prison, and he knew day must have come. The next time he came to it, it was dark again. What about me? Have I eaten yet? Yes, I actually have. McDonald's, actually. I love eating McDonald's fast food. The next time he came to it, it was already dark. They hadn't fed him yet. His stomach was growling in protest as it gnawed away at itself. His throat was parched and dry. His tongue felt as if it had swollen up large enough to choke him. Despite this, there was a slowly increasing pressure on his bladder. But he didn't want to relieve himself. The pit stank enough already. Maybe they were just going to leave him here to die a slow and lonely death. Yeah, I'm loving it. Given the rumors he'd heard of Sith torture, he'd almost hoped that that was the actual case. But he hadn't given up yet. Not yet, at least. When he heard the sound of approaching footsteps, he scrambled to his feet and stood straight and tall. Even though his hands were still cuffed in front of him, through the containment field, he could just make out the blurred forms of several guards standing on the edge of the pit, along with another figure wearing a heavy dark cloak. What do you call me? I am Sakai Ichigo. Just call me Ichigo. Really? Bartender of this bar? And vivid video game enthusiast. Take him to my ship, the cloaked figure said in a deep, rasping voice. I will deal with this one here on Korriban. Ichigo, yeah. Chapter 8. Des never got a clear look at the man who'd ordered his transfer. By the time they'd got him out of the pit, the cloaked figure had vanished. They gave him food and water, and let him clean and refresh himself. Though he was freed from the cuffs, he was still under heavy guard as he boarded the small transport, headed for Korriban. Nobody spoke to him on the trip, and Des didn't know what was going on. At least he wasn't cuffed anymore. He chose to take that as a good sign. They arrived in the middle of the day. He had expected them to touch down at Drishday, the only city on the dark and forbidding world. Instead, the ship landed at the starport built atop an ancient temple overlooking a desolate valley. A chill wind blew across the landing pad as he disembarked, but didn't bother Des. Ichigo is a name for Japan. It's a Japanese name. But I am not from Japan. I am from Singapore. Where was I? Right. Instead, the ship landed at the starport built atop an ancient temple overlooking a desolate valley. A chill wind blew across the landing pad as he disembarked. But it didn't bother Des. After the stale air of the pit, any breeze felt good. Yeah, Indonesia. Nice to meet you. He felt a shiver go down his spine as his foot touched Korriban's surface. He heard that this had once been a place of great power, though now only the merest shadow remained. There was an undercurrent of malice here. He'd felt it as soon as the transport had entered the bleak planet's atmosphere. From this vantage point, he could make out other temples scattered across the world's desert surface. Even at this distance, he could perceive the eroded rock and crumbling stone of the once grand entrance. Beyond the valley, the city of Drishte was a mere speck on the horizon. He was met on the landing pad by a hooded figure. He could tell right away this wasn't the same one who had come to him in that pit. This person had neither the size nor the impressive bearing of his liberator. Even through the containment field, Des had been able to sense his commanding presence. This figure, which Des now thought to be a female, motioned for him to follow. Silently, she led him down a flight of stairs made of stone and into the temple itself. They crossed a landing and descended another set of stairs, then repeated the pattern, working their way level by level down from the temple's apex to the ground. Hey, see you. No worries. Goodbye. Hope to see you in the next stream too. They crossed a landing and descended another set of stairs, then repeated the pattern, working their way level by level down from the temple's apex to the ground below. There were doors and passages leading off from each landing, and Des could hear snippets of sound and conversation echoing from them, though he could never quite tell what was being said. She didn't speak, and Des knew better than to break the silence himself. Technically, he was still a prisoner. For all he knew, she was leading him to his court-martial. He wasn't about to make things worse by asking foolish questions. When they reached the bottom of the building, she led him to a stone archway with yet another flight of stairs. These were different, however. They were narrow and dark, and wound their way down until they vanished from sight, deep in the bowels of the ground. Without a word, his guide handed him a torch she had taken from a bracket on the wall, and then stepped aside. Wondering what was going on, Des made his way carefully down the steep staircase. He couldn't say how much deeper he went. It was difficult to maintain any perspective in the narrow confines of the stairwell. After several minutes, he reached the bottom, only to find a long hallway stretching out before him. At the end of the hallway, he encountered a single room. The room was dark and filled with shadow. Only a few torches sputtered on the stone wall, their dying flames barely able to pierce the gloom. Des paused at the threshold, letting his eyes adjust. He could just make out a dim figure inside. It beckoned him. Come forward. He felt a chill, though the room was far from cold. The air itself was electric, filled with a power he could actually feel. He was surprised that he didn't feel afraid. He recognized what he felt as the chill of anticipation. As Des moved deeper into the room, the features of the shrouded figure became clear, revealing himself to be a Twi'lek. Even under the loose-fitting robes he wore, Des could see he was thick and heavy-set. He stood nearly 2 meters tall, easily the largest Twi'lek Des has ever met, though not quite as large as Des himself. His leku wound down his broad chest and wrapped back or up around his muscular neck and shoulders. His eyes glowed orange beneath his brow, mirroring the flickering torches. He smiled, revealing the sharp-pointed teeth common to his species. "I am Lord Kopex of the Sith," he said. At that moment, Des knew without a doubt that this was the cloaked one who had come to him in the pit, and he gave a slight bow of his head in acknowledgement. "I am to be your Inquisitor," Lord Kopex explained. His voice showed no emotion. "I alone will determine your fate. Rest assured, my judgment will be final." Des nodded again. The Twi'lek fixed his burning orange eyes on Des. "You are no friend of the Jedi or their Republic." It wasn't a question, but Des felt compelled to answer anyway. "What have they ever done for me?" "Exactly," Kopex said with a cruel smile. "I understand you have fought many battles against the Republic forces. Your fellow troopers speak highly of you. The Sith have need of men like you if we are to win this war." He paused. "You were a model soldier until you disobeyed a direct order." "The order was a mistake," Des said. His throat has grown so dry and tight that he had trouble getting the words out. "Why did you refuse to attack the outpost during the day? Are you a coward?" "A coward wouldn't have completed the mission," Des replied sharply, stung by the accusation. Kopex tilted his head to the side and waited. "Attacking the daylight was a tactical mistake," Des continued, trying to press his point. "Ulabor should have relayed that information back to command, but he was too scared. Ulabor was the coward, not me. He would rather risk death at the hands of the Republic than face the Brotherhood of Darkness. I prefer not to throw my life away needlessly." "You can see that from your service record," Kopex said. "Kashyyyk, Trandosha, Fasira. If these reports are accurate, you have performed incredible feats during your time with the Gloomwalkers. Feats some would claim to be impossible." Des bristled at the implication. "The reports are accurate," he replied. "I have no doubt they are." Kopex either hadn't noticed or didn't care about the tone of Des's reply. "Do you know why I brought you to Korriban?" Des was beginning to realize that this wasn't really a court-martial after all. It was some kind of test. Though for what? He still wasn't sure. "I feel I've been chosen for something." Kopex gave him another sinister smile. "Good. Your mind works quickly. What do you know of the Force?" "Not much," Des admitted with a shrug. "It's something the Jedi believe in. Some great power that's supposed to be just floating around out there in the universe somewhere." "And what do you know of the Jedi?" "I know they believe themselves to be guardians of the Republic," Des replied, making no attempt to hide his contempt. "I know they wield great influence in the Senate. I know many believe they have mystical powers." "And what about the Brotherhood of Darkness?" Des considered his words more carefully this time. "You are the leaders of our army, and the sworn enemies of the Jedi. Many believe that you, like them, have unnatural abilities. But you do not?" Des hesitated, struggling to come up with the answer he thought Kopex wanted to hear. In the end, he couldn't figure out what his Inquisitor was looking for, so he simply told him the truth. "I believe most of those stories are greatly exaggerated." Kopex nodded. "A common enough belief. Those who do not understand the ways of the Force regard such tales as myth or legend. But the Force is real, and those who wield it have power you can't even imagine." You have seen many battles, but you have not experienced a real war. While troops vie for control of worlds or moons, the Jedi and Sith Masters seek to destroy each other. We are being driven towards an inevitable and final confrontation. The faction that survives, Sith or Jedi, will determine the fate of the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. True victory in this war will not come through armies, but through the Brotherhood of Darkness. Our greatest weapon is the Force, and those individuals who have the power to command it. Individuals like you. Apologies. Let me mute the mic for a while. Need a hydration check. He paused to let his words sink in before continuing. You are special at this. You have many remarkable talents. Those talents are manifestation of the Force. They have served you well as a soldier, but you have only scratched the surface of your gift. The Force is real. It exists all around us. You can feel the power of it in this room. Can you sense it? Des hesitated only a moment before nodding. I feel it. Hot. Like a fire waiting to explode. Power of the dark side. The heat of passion and emotion. I can feel it in you as well. Burning beneath the surface. Burning like your anger. It makes you strong. Kopex closed his eyes and tilted his head back, as if basking in the heat. The tips of his head tails twitched ever so slightly. The only sound was the faint crackle of flames from the torches. A bead of sweat rolled down the crown of Death's bare scalp and along the back of his neck. He didn't wipe it away, though he did shift his feet uncomfortably as it trickled its way between his shoulder blades. The slight movement seemed to snap the Twi'lek out of his trance. He didn't speak again for several seconds, but he studied Des intently with his piercing gaze. You have touched the Force in the past, but your abilities are an insignificant speck beside the power of a true Sith Master, he finally said. There is great potential in you, Des. If you stay here on Korriban, we can teach you to unleash it. Des was speechless. You would no longer be a trooper on the front lines, Kopex continued. If you accept my offer, that part of your life is over. You will be trained in the ways of the dark side. You will become one of the Brotherhood of Darkness. And you will not return to the Gloomwalkers. Des felt his heart pounding, his head swimming. As long as he could remember, he'd known he was special because of his unique talents. And now he was being told that his abilities were nothing compared with what he could really accomplish? Still, part of him balked at the idea of leaving his unit without even having a chance to say goodbye. He considered Adanar, Lucia, and the others as more than just fellow soldiers. They were his friends. Could he really abandon them like this, even for the chance to join the Sith? He recalled one of the last things Groshik had ever said to him. Don't count on others for help. In the end, each of us is in this alone. The survivors are those who know how to look out for themselves. Everything he'd had, he'd given to his unit. He'd saved their lives, too many times to count. And in the end, when the enforcers had come to take him away, they'd been powerless to save him. They would have tried if he'd let them, but they would have failed. Des realized the truth. His unit, his friends, could do nothing for him now. he could rely only on himself. Like always. He'd be a fool to turn this opportunity down. I am honored, Master Kopex, and I greatly accept your offer. The way of the Sith is not for the weak, the big Twi'lek warned. Those who falter will be left behind. There was something ominous in his tone. I won't be left behind, Des replied, unfazed. That remains to be seen, Kopex noted. Then he added, This is a new beginning for you, Des. A new life. Many of the students who come here take a new name for themselves. They leave their old life behind. Des had no desire to hang on to any part of his old life. An abusive father, the brutality of working the mines on Epitros. He had been seeking a new life for as long as he could remember. The Gloomwalkers had offered an escape, but it had been a temporary one. Now, he had a chance to leave his past behind forever. All he had to do was embrace the Brotherhood of Darkness and its teachings. And yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt the cold grip of fear closing in on him. The fear made him hesitate. Do you wish to choose a new name for yourself, Des? Kopex asked, possibly sensing his reluctance. Do you wish to be reborn? Des nodded. Kopex smiled once more. And by what name shall we now call you? The fear would not stop him. He would seize the fear, transform it, and make it his own. He would take what had once made him weak, use it to make himself strong. My name is Bane. Bane of the Sith. Elsewhere, Lord Cordis, exalted master of the Sith Academy on Korriban, scratched gently at his chin with long, talon-like fingers. This student you have brought me, this Bane, has never been trained in the ways of the Force? Kopex shook his head and twitched his leku ever so slightly in annoyance. As I told you before, Cordis, he grew up on Apatros, a world controlled by the Oro Company. Yet you managed to find this young man and bring him here to the Academy. It seems almost too convenient. The heavy-set Twi'lek snarled. This is not a plot against you, Cordis. That is no longer our way. We are a brotherhood now, remember? You are too suspicious. Cordis laughed. Not suspicious, cautious. It has helped me to maintain my position here among so many powerful and ambitious young Sith. He is as powerful as any of them, Kopex insisted. But he is also older. We prefer to find our students when they are younger and more malleable. Now you start to sound like a Jedi, Cordis. They seek younger and younger pupils, hoping to find them pure and innocent. In time, they will refuse any who are not infants. We must be quick to pluck those they leave behind. Besides, he continued, Bane is too strong to simply pass over, even for the Jedi. We are lucky we found him before they did. Yes, lucky, Cordis echoed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. His arrival here seems to be an incredible turn of many fortuitous events. Quite lucky, indeed. Some might see it that way, Kopex admitted. Others might see it as something more. Destiny, perhaps. There was silence, while Cordis considered his longtime rival's words. The other acolytes have been training for many years, Kopex. He will be far behind, he said at last. he will catch up, if given time and the chance. Kopex insisted. And I wonder, will the others give him that chance? Not if they're smart. I'm afraid we may simply be throwing away one of Lord Khan's best troops. We both know the Jedi won't be defeated by soldiers, Kopex snapped. I'd gladly trade 1,000 of our best troopers for even one Sith Master. Cordis seemed taken aback by his passionate reaction. He is that strong, is he? This Bane? Kopex nodded. I think he might be the one we've all been searching for. He could even be the Sithari. Before he can claim that title, Cordis said with a cunning smile, he'll have to survive his training. And I'll look forward to it. And I'll be watching him very, very closely. End of chapter. And end of part 1. This is where we'll end off here. Also, for those of you guys who are wondering, the Sithari in Star Wars and mythology is basically the chosen one of the Sith. It's in the same vein as the chosen one for the Jedi that the Jedi had prophesied about, which, if you watch the Star Wars movies, and spoilers if you haven't, Anakin Skywalker later turned Darth Vader, and also the one who destroyed Emperor Palpatine and ended the reign of the Sith and all that stuff. The Sithari is basically the Sith equivalent of the chosen one. But I'm not here to theorize or talk about all that. So let's put that aside for now. Firstly, thank you all for coming to the stream. I hope you all enjoyed, truly. And last but not least, before you leave the bar, please remember, leave your glasses at the bar counter after you're done with your drink. Don't forget any of your belongings when you leave, and have a safe trip home. Everyone, I'll see you all in the next video. This video is definitely going on the VOD on YouTube. You can check this out on YouTube if you wish. Do like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.